Clint Eastwood sat quietly in the waiting lounge at Los Angeles International Airport. As always, he wore a simple leather jacket, jeans, and sunglasses. The bustling crowd around him either didn't recognize him, or, if they did, lacked the courage to approach. Clint's presence carried a certain gravitas, silent but commanding. That day, Clint was flying to New York for a conference. He enjoyed observing people at airports, studying their behavior and the expressions on their faces. This habit had inspired him throughout his acting and directing career. But today his eyes were fixed on one man more than anyone else, an elderly gentleman. The man stood out with his gray hair and weathered features. He wore an old military jacket adorned with medals pinned to the pocket, each telling a tale of heroism from years past. His face bore the marks of a hard life. Clint noticed a slight limp as the man walked, struggling to carry a suitcase that seemed too heavy for him. Clint considered getting up to help, but the man's proud demeanor gave him pause. If I offer help uninvited, he might feel insulted, Clint thought. Instead, he continued watching from a distance. When the boarding call came, Clint joined the line for first-class passengers. His gaze still lingered on the old man, who was heading toward the economy section, struggling to stow his worn suitcase. Other passengers grumbled impatiently, yet no one stepped forward to assist. Once Clint was seated in the spacious comfort of first class, he felt a growing unease. He couldn't shake the image of the elderly man squeezed into a narrow middle seat at the back of the plane. A man like that, Clint thought, deserved more respect. The urge to change the situation grew stronger. Finally, Clint called over a flight attendant. "There's a man in the back wearing a military jacket," he said in his calm yet resolute voice. "I'd like to switch seats with him." The flight attendant looked at Clint, momentarily stunned. "Sir, this is your seat. You're welcome to stay here," she replied politely. Clint shook his head slightly. "I know, but that man deserves this seat more than I do." After a moment of hesitation, the attendant agreed. When she approached the elderly man to explain the situation, his reaction was visibly emotional. As Clint walked toward the economy section, whispers spread among the passengers. People began noticing him, some reaching for their phones, but Clint ignored the attention, heading directly to the man. "This seat is yours now," he said with a warm smile. The man initially protested. "You don't have to do this," he said. "I don't have to," Clint replied, "but I want to." As a thank you, the man shook Clint's hand, his eyes brimming with gratitude. "Thank you, son. My name is Jack," he said. Clint nodded. "Nice to meet you, Jack. Enjoy the seat." After the exchange, Clint took a standard economy seat, quietly opening his book and reading without engaging with anyone. Yet a deep sense of peace filled his heart. Meanwhile, Jack settled into the plush leather seat in first class, feeling special for the first time in years. The emotions playing across his face hinted at a deeper story, one that would soon reveal an unexpected connection to Clint's past. As the plane cruised high above the clouds, Clint Eastwood settled into his new seat in the back of the aircraft. The cramped space and lack of luxury were of no concern to him. His mind lingered on Jack, the elderly man now sitting comfortably in first class. Clint had always believed in small acts of kindness, but something about Jack resonated with him on a deeper level, though he couldn't quite place why. Meanwhile, up in first class, Jack couldn't stop thinking about Clint's unexpected gesture. He gazed out of the window, his fingers gently brushing against the medals on his chest. Those medals symbolized years of sacrifice, battles fought, and friends lost. Yet in all those years, no one had made him feel as appreciated as Clint Eastwood had, with just a simple act of generosity. Jack's mind wandered to his past, and memories of his youth flooded in like an unstoppable tide. He had been a young soldier during World War II, stationed in the Pacific. The horrors of war had left scars, both physical and emotional. But amidst the chaos, there had been moments of humanity, moments that kept him going. One such moment was tied to Clint's name, though he didn't yet realize the connection. The in-flight meal service began, and Clint noticed Jack occasionally glancing back at him. The man seemed to be wrestling with whether to approach Clint. Finally, during a lull in the cabin's activity, Jack stood up and made his way down the aisle. Clint looked up from his book, surprised but pleased to see Jack standing before him. "Mind if I join you for a moment?" Jack asked, his voice tinged with gratitude and curiosity. Not at all, Clint replied, gesturing to the seat next to him. Jack sat down, his hands clasped tightly together. After a moment of silence, he said, I just wanted to thank you again. What you did back there, it means more than you know. Clint offered a small smile. No need to thank me. It just felt like the right thing to do. Jack nodded, his gaze dropping to the floor. You know, I've been through a lot in my time. Sometimes it feels like the world has moved on and forgotten about people like me. But today you reminded me that there's still kindness out there. Clint tilted his head, sensing there was more Jack wanted to say. You've lived quite a life, haven't you? Jack chuckled softly. That's one way to put it. I served in the Pacific during the war. Lost a lot of good men out there. It changes you, seeing the things we saw. Clint's expression grew more serious. I can only imagine. My father used to talk about his time in the war, too. He wasn't on the front lines, but he did his part. I guess that's where my respect for veterans like you comes from. Jack's eyes widened slightly. Your father, what was his name? Clinton Eastwood Sr., Clint replied, a note of pride in his voice. Jack's breath caught and his hands trembled slightly. Clinton Eastwood, I knew him. We served together. He saved my life during the Battle of Lady Gulf. Clint froze, the revelation hitting him like a lightning bolt. You're saying you knew my dad? He never talked much about the war, but I knew it had a profound impact on him. Jack nodded, his voice thick with emotion. Your father was a good man, brave, selfless. During one of the naval battles, our ship was hit. I was pinned under debris, and everyone else thought I was done for. But your dad, he refused to leave me behind. He risked his life to pull me out and get me to safety. I owed him everything, but I never got the chance to thank him properly after the war ended. Clint stared at Jack, his emotions swirling. I had no idea. He passed away years ago, but he always carried himself with a quiet strength. Now I understand why. Jack reached out and placed a hand on Clint's shoulder. Your father's courage and kindness live on through you. What you did today, it felt like a part of him was still here. Clint swallowed hard, struggling to keep his composure. Thank you for telling me this. It means more than I can say. The two men sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their shared connection settling between them. Clint felt as though he had gained a piece of his father back, a piece he hadn't even known was missing. As Jack returned to his first-class seat, Clint leaned back and closed his eyes, his heart full. The flight continued on, but for Clint and Jack, it was no longer just a journey from one city to another. It was a journey through time, memory, and a bond that transcended generations. As the hours passed, Clint Eastwood sat quietly in his seat, staring out at the seemingly endless expanse of clouds beyond the small window. The revelation Jack had shared weighed heavily on his mind, yet it brought an unexpected sense of solace. His father's legacy, long shrouded in quiet mystery, now felt tangible in a way it never had before. He could almost see his father as Jack described him, selfless, courageous, and deeply human. Jack, meanwhile, sat in first class, staring at the medals pinned to his chest. They had always served as reminders of the sacrifices he and his comrades had made. But today, they felt different. They were no longer just symbols of his past. They were ties to the Eastwood family, to the man who had saved his life, and to the son who had unknowingly carried forward his father's spirit. As the flight attendants began serving drinks, Clint noticed Jack glancing back at him again. This time, Clint didn't wait for Jack to make a move. He unbuckled his seatbelt and made his way to the first-class cabin. The passengers in the plush seats looked up briefly as Clint passed, some recognizing him with wide-eyed amazement, but refraining from saying anything. Jack noticed Clint approaching and smiled warmly, gesturing for him to take the empty seat beside him. You didn't have to come up here, son, Jack said, his voice tinged with gratitude. Clint shrugged, a faint smile playing on his lips. Something tells me we've got more to talk about, Jack chuckled. You're not wrong. He glanced at Clint thoughtfully before asking, what was your father like outside the stories I've told you? Clint hesitated, searching for the right words. He was quiet. He didn't talk much about himself, but he had this way of making you feel safe, like everything would be okay as long as he was around. He was my rock, you know, the kind of man who believed in hard work, honesty, and treating people with respect. Jack nodded slowly. That sounds like the Clint I knew. He wasn't just a hero on the battlefield. He was the kind of man who made you want to be better, even in the worst of times. The conversation turned to Jack's memories of the war. He described the intense battles, the camaraderie among the soldiers, and the haunting losses that had shaped him. Clint listened intently, feeling as though he were piecing together a puzzle of his father's life, one memory at a time. You know, Jack said after a long pause, your father talked about you a lot. Well, not you exactly. You weren't born yet. But he talked about the family he wanted to have someday. He said if he ever had a son, he'd teach him to stand up for what's right and to always lend a helping hand. Clint's chest tightened. He did teach me that. Maybe not with words, but by example. I think that's why I've always tried to live by those principles, even when it wasn't easy. Jack smiled. Then he'd be proud of the man you've become. I know I am. As the plane continued its journey, their conversation drifted to lighter topics: films, family, and life's unexpected twists. Jack admitted he had seen many of Clint's movies over the years, though he hadn't connected the actor to the young boy Clint's father had spoken of during the war. You're quite the storyteller, Jack said with a chuckle. I guess that runs in the family. Clint laughed. Maybe, but I think my stories would have been a lot different if I hadn't had my dad's example to look up to. The hours melted away as the two men shared their lives, bridging the gap between generations. By the time the plane began its descent, Clint felt as though he had gained not just a deeper understanding of his father, but a new friend in Jack. As the announcement came over the intercom to prepare for landing, Clint turned to Jack. I'd like to stay in touch. You've given me something I didn't even know I needed, a connection to my dad's past. I'd like to return the favor if I can. Jack's eyes glistened with unshed tears. I'd like that too. It's never too late to make new connections, and I think your father would have wanted us to look out for each other. When the plane touched down, the two men disembarked together, drawing curious glances from the other passengers. Clint helped Jack retrieve his small suitcase from the overhead compartment, and they walked together through the terminal. Before they parted ways, Clint handed Jack a slip of paper with his contact information. If you're ever in California, look me up. I'd love to hear more of your stories and maybe share a few of my own. Jack smiled, his hand trembling slightly as he accepted the paper. You've got a deal, Clint, and thank you for everything. As Clint watched Jack disappear into the crowd, he felt an unfamiliar warmth in his chest. It was as though a circle had been completed, a bridge built between past and present. Little did Clint know their paths were destined to cross again in ways neither of them could have imagined. The days following Clint Eastwood's chance encounter with Jack were filled with reflection. Back home in California, Clint found himself drawn to old photographs and mementos of his father, items he hadn't looked at in years. One evening, he pulled out a dusty box from the attic, marked only with the initials CE. Inside were faded photographs, letters from the war, and a tarnished pocket watch his father had carried during his service. Clint held the watch in his hand, running his fingers over its engraved surface. It was a simple piece, but it carried a weight far beyond its physical form. He remembered his father telling him that the watch had been a gift from his own father, a reminder to always keep time for the important things. The words resonated deeply now. The flight with Jack had reawakened something in Clint, a desire to not only honor his father's memory, but to truly understand the man behind the stories. Days turned into weeks, and Clint kept his promise to stay in touch with Jack. They spoke often, sharing more stories and learning from one another. Jack in turn shared more details about Clint's father, how he had risked his life to save others, his quiet strength under pressure, and his unwavering belief in doing what was right. One day Clint had an idea. He called Jack and asked, "Do you think you'd be up for a trip to California? I've got something I'd like to show you." Jack didn't hesitate. "It would be an honor, Clint. Just tell me when." A week later, Clint picked up Jack from the airport. Despite his advanced age, Jack stepped off the plane with a lively energy, his eyes bright with excitement. They drove through the winding roads of California, the landscape shifting from bustling cityscapes to the serene countryside. Their destination was Clint's ranch, a sprawling property nestled in the hills, surrounded by towering oak trees and rolling green pastures. Clint had always considered it a sanctuary, a place where he could escape the chaos of Hollywood and reconnect with nature. As they arrived, Jack looked around in awe. "This is beautiful, Clint. Your father would have loved this." Clint smiled. "I think so too. Come on, I want to show you something." He led Jack to a small outbuilding at the edge of the property. Inside was a workshop filled with tools, woodworking projects, and shelves lined with books and photographs. At the center of the room was a meticulously crafted display case, housing his father's medals, letters, and other keepsakes. Jack's eyes widened as he stepped closer. "This is incredible. You've kept all of this?" "I didn't know what to do with it for the longest time," Clint admitted, "but after meeting you, I realized it was time to give these memories the respect they deserve." Among the items in the display case was a photograph of Clint's father with his unit, standing shoulder to shoulder in their uniforms. Jack leaned in, his hand trembling as he touched the glass. "That's us," he said softly. "That's your father, and that's me, right beside him. God, we were so young." Clint watched as Jack's emotions played out across his face: joy, sorrow, and a deep sense of gratitude. "There's more," Clint said, pulling out a small box from beneath the display case. Inside was the pocket watch, polished to a brilliant shine. He handed it to Jack. "This belonged to my dad," Clint explained. "He always said it reminded him to keep time for the important things. I think it's only right that you have it now." Jack's eyes filled with tears as he accepted the watch. "Clint, I I don't know what to say. This means more to me than you'll ever know." The two men stood in silence for a moment, the weight of the past and present settling between them. Over the next few days, Clint and Jack spent hours walking the property, sharing stories and reflecting on their lives. Clint opened up about his struggles balancing fame and family, while Jack recounted tales of his post-war years, how he had coped with loss, found love, and built a life despite the scars of the past. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Clint brought Jack to a quiet hilltop overlooking the ranch. "This spot," Clint said, "is where I come to think. It's where I feel closest to my dad." Jack nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "It's peaceful. I can see why he'd love it here." Clint reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I found this letter in my dad's things. It's addressed to you." Jack's hands shook as he unfolded the letter. The handwriting was unmistakably Clint Sr.'s, strong and deliberate, yet filled with emotion. The letter read, "Dear Jack, if you're reading this, it means I didn't make it home. I want you to know how much your friendship meant to me. You kept me going when times were tough, and I'll always be grateful for that. Take care of yourself and don't let the darkness win. There's too much beauty in this world to give up on it. If I don't make it back, tell my family I love them. And Jack, if you ever meet my son, tell him I'm proud of him. I know he'll do great things." Jack's voice broke as he finished reading. "He always believed in you, Clint, and he was right." Clint placed a hand on Jack's shoulder. "I think he'd be proud of both of us, Jack, for everything we've done and for keeping his memory alive." As the night deepened, the two men sat beneath the stars, sharing stories and laughter. They knew their time together was finite, but the bond they had formed would endure long after they parted ways. For Clint, the experience was transformative. He had gained not only a deeper understanding of his father, but a new sense of purpose, honoring the past while embracing the present. And for Jack, the journey had brought closure to a chapter of his life that had long been shrouded in pain. He had found a connection to the family of his fallen friend, a bond that transcended time and loss. As they said their goodbyes the next morning, Jack turned to Clint with a smile. "Your father would have been proud of the man you are, Clint, and I'm proud to call you my friend." Clint watched as Jack disappeared down the road, his heart full of gratitude. The circle was complete, and a legacy once buried in the sands of time had been rekindled, shining brighter than ever.